Hello, welcome to this video, and on this video I'm going to be explaining how the drum kit works primarily for non-drummers. If you are a drummer, there may still be some stuff on this video that is quite interesting because I'm going to be going through the history of the drum kit and how these instruments came to be the way they are. Okay, so I am sat here behind my trusty old drum kit. I've had this drum kit for around about 25 years. This kit's been all over the world with me. This is an old kit that I've had for a long time. I'm also playing my beautiful Dream cymbals. You know, I play Dream cymbals, beautiful, right? The drum kit, obviously drums go back almost to the beginning of time. If you ever watch a toddler going around the house, it doesn't take long for them to pick something up and start banging something with it, does it? So human beings have been hitting stuff probably as long as there's been human beings. The drum kit evolves primarily in Africa, where a lot of African music is based heavily on the drums. The drum being literally a cylinder with usually used to be an animal skin stretched over the top. And that when you hit that, it vibrates, it sends a column of air down through the drum, which then creates a lovely tone, right? In Europe, these instruments were used in orchestral settings, sometimes as effects to create sort of sound effects rather than creating rhythms. But rhythmically, in the West, we use these in warfare. So armies would often go out to war and they would have a drum corps with them. Now this obviously goes back to ancient times where, you know, you're facing your foe on a field and you want to look as scary as you possibly can. So you want to make a lot of noise, and these make a lot of noise. Also, if you play with multiple drummers in a row, and this also I believe comes from African music, African drumming, for the drummers to all play in time and together and look like they're playing together requires a high degree of complicity, but also of taking orders. So the drums are a great way of training an army, you know, not only in playing them, but also if you're marching and there's a beat, then you're marching to that beat. If you're marching, you're carrying a drum. And in a marching drum ensemble, there's basically three instruments. There's the snare drum, which is this one here. Have the bass drum, which is the one down here, and if you've ever seen a marching band, often you'll get the two guys with the cymbals that are clashing those together, and that is emulated by this here. And that there are the basis of the drum kit. These are extras. The basics of the drum kit is a bass drum, a snare drum, and what we call the hi-hats, which are emulating the clash cymbals. But as you can see, what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to play all three instruments at the same time. Now, originally, that was not the case, right? They were played separately. One guy walking along playing the bass drum, and then someone behind him play the snare. So, the reason why the drum kit came about was at some point in history, when these bands started to make some money, some clever drummer realised that he could earn more money, or he would get the gig if he could play all three of these instruments at the same time. Now, the guy that we can say has gone down in history as doing this is a drummer called D.D. Chancellor, who was playing the drums in the late 19th century in New Orleans in a black jazz group. I think it could have been the Excelsior jazz group, but I'm not sure off the top of my head. Up until that point, drummers who had been trying to get the gig and play the bass drum at the snare drum, this didn't exist at that point, they were kicking the drum. They would kick the drum like that. And this is why sometimes this is referred to as a kick drum. Now, what D.D. Chandler did is he fashioned out of wood a pedal that would play the bass drum. Now, he actually wasn't the first to do this. There was a group in the Victorian times in England that played stones, believe it or not. They used to have a little orchestra where they played rocks and stones, and they performed in front of Queen Victoria. And they also fashioned a pedal that could play a bass drum. All right. So this is obviously a thing that people were trying to do in the 19th century. In 1909, Ludwig, who made drums, made the first commercially available bass drum pedal. And now you can play the same, these two at the same time. All right, and there, what I'm doing is I'm playing bass drum, snare drum. I'm playing military patterns on there, but I'm playing them in a syncopated fashion. Now this comes out of the jazz groups in New Orleans. The drum kit really emerges out of jazz. It wasn't until 1925, I would say, something like that, that somebody had the idea of creating something that could do the clash cymbals. And originally it was called a lowboy, and this was on the floor. And drummers realised that not only could they do that, or and play it like that, but they could shut it and they could tap it, giving you a nice jig sound. And drummers who back then were playing traditional grip, now traditional grip you might realise is because the reason why some drummers play like that is if you're in a military band, if you're in a marching band and you're playing the snare drum is slung here, and if you're playing like that you can't get on top of it, but you can see I can play quite comfortably on the side here if I'm in traditional grip. So early drummers all played traditional grip, and a lot of drummers don't realise this is when people first got the hi-hats, because they were playing here and there was a low boy and the cymbals down there, they started to play it down there like that, and they were playing it down there. So when these were invented and brought this up to a point where you could hit it, which I think is the sort of early 30s, I would imagine, drummers were playing like this. Which I just cannot play, like it's so weird. If you watch some old Buddy Rich videos back from the 40s, sometimes you will see him playing like that with his right hand over his left. Now, one of the problems with these drum kits is, if you take them into an old-fashioned recording studio, which in the old days was just a cylinder recorder, it was just a needle scratching a scratch in a groove, right? If you went in 1923, and you're basically playing into a great big hall and there's no microphones there, invented in 1925, and you do this, that could distort, or even worse, jump the needle on your recording, okay? Which is a pain in the bum. So when drummers went in, they started to, they were told by who's recording, oh, you can't do that beat. So they started to play like wood blocks, because the drum kit was often used in travelling cinema shows to accompany silent movies. So they were trying to emulate like thunderstorms and gunshots and sort of stuff like that. And so they had all sorts of sound contraptions there with them. So drummers often would have these. One of the first drummers that's recorded, which is Baby Dodds in the 1920s, had earned his living in one of these movie accompanying groups. And so he had all these contraptions. This is why the drum kit is often called a traps kit, because traps is short for contraptions. See, there's loads of information on this one. So when they got in, they couldn't go. They wouldn't be able to do that. They wouldn't have got away with it. So they had to play contraptions. Maybe they're playing a cowbell or they're playing something like that. When the hi-hat comes along, and this is in the 30s, the timekeeping transfers from being here on the snare drum, which is situated in front of us, so the time gets transferred to here. Now the way the drum kit is set up, this creates a problem with the drums forevermore, because anyone who's starting the drum kit is now being told that the timekeeping device is often this hi-hat here. And that hi-hat is crossing over your right hand. So as soon as you start to play, these sticks start clicking all over. If you watch drummers who have gone down a bad route and not been taught properly, you will often see them shifting over to here, they'll lean over to this side here, and then this will all become very locked so they don't click these drumsticks together. Now, it's something I've seen with young drummers over and over. So you have to be aware of how the drum kit works. Later on, a whole bunch of things have been added to them. Like I said, all these contraptions were added to the kit. But when Gene Krupa emerges in the 1930s, he's playing a kit with what are called tom-toms. And these are an emulation of sort of African standard drum. So that's what a Gene Krupa brings us. You have the toms. Of course, we've had cymbals, which are basically sound effects. These come originally from China, and the first cymbals are Chinese cymbals. And then we start to get these more like Turkish cymbals. And the history of drumming and rhythm keeping in jazz is the rhythm moving from the snare drum to the hi-hat. And the guy that really pioneered that was Joe Jones with the Count Basie group. You know, and then we get the transference of the time with the beboppers onto the ride cymbal. That is basically what we're getting with the history of jazz, is the time has manoeuvred. All the way through this, I am swinging, right? Swinging is a really weird way of feeling time, and it really comes out of jazz. Now, there's a number of theories that I have of how that came about, right? Now, it could have come from African music. And African music tends to use what we could call a 3/2 polyrhythm. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go over to here to the snare drum, and I'm going to take off the snares, because one of the things I didn't tell you early on, there's a thing that with the snare drum that's interesting, is it's got these bits of metal, like a snare that you would catch an animal with, and they can be tightened with this thing here, this lever here. So this now is vibrating any sound that goes in, so the impact when I hit the snare drum goes down through and creates that very snappy tight sound. If I take off the snares, I now just get the sound of the drum, which sounds now like a high tom-tom. Low tom-tom, high tom-tom. Now the pitch of those is determined on two things. One of them is how big the drum is, and two is how tightly these are wound up. There's little pegs here that you can tune up to get different notes out of them. Right, so African music is often based upon a 3/2 polyrhythm, which sounds like this. And often that is inverted, so we're getting the 3/2 feel. So here's the 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. And we've got a 3 existing in the same space as that. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now I can invert that like this, which means I'm going to just play it a little bit later than I should. So 1, 2, 3, 4. That's your 3/2 polyrhythm. Oh God, I messed up there. These are quite tricky. There's obviously a little bit of that in that swing feel, that 3/2, but how does that 3/2 actually emerge in jazz swing? Well, I'm going to try and get to this in a minute, and it's all guesswork. We're all trying to work out how these rhythms come through. When the African slaves arrived in South America, they do not have their music taken away from them like these slaves that went to North America. And so they are able to take these 3/2 rhythms, and they get warped into what we would associate with Latin music, which would be. Now, what that rhythm has now become is it's been simplified to this rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's a strong argument that that rhythm coming from Latin America comes through the Creoles and comes in through that route. And that rhythm is heard more in early jazz than the 3/2. All right? But the 3/2 may well have appeared in this way. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play the 3/2 polyrhythm on my snare drum. You'll hear it. So here, there's a 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. So play that all together. Now we speed that up. We start to hear something that sounds a little bit like a swing, doesn't it? There's a slight sound of a swing beat here. So imagine that thing now that we're moving our time over to the hi-hat. What would that sound like now? And that simplifies to this rhythm. So we could see that these rhythms are coming from Africa, they're coming from South America. We've got a rhythm which is coming out of the church, which is this sort of... And of course we have the marching rhythms. All those rhythms are coming together. And they're all coming together in different ways, in different machinations. You know, we're seeing that happening certain ways. But also, there's something very interesting about the jazz swing for me. And it's to do with the technique. A lot of people who study jazz history, they don't necessarily study the history of drum technique, which is something that I've done. And that line goes in a completely different direction. Drumming goes back through the American Civil War drummers, back to the English Civil War drummers. And a lot of when you're playing for a long time, a lot of the techniques are coming from the fact that if you're holding the stick too tight when you play, you're going to damage your hands. So you need to hold the sticks very loose. So drummers, if you are watching, I believe fundamentally all drum technique is to do with being able to strike from straight up here, dropping the stick down. So I'm gripping the stick here tight, I'm dropping it down, and I'm releasing it, and I'm allowing it to bounce against the pivot, which is inside my hand here. Now, if we strike the drum in that way, we can get volume, but without impacting our hands, because as we hit, we are getting out the way of the stick. And when we do that, the stick comes alive and it starts to come back on itself. And we go from a tightly held sound to an open sound. And the drum kit changes. Fundamentally, that's where technique comes from. And that's definitely coming through this sort of military angle of drumstick history. So, what's interesting to me is if I just do that and let the drum bounce 3 times, let's see what we get. Now I'm not playing that, that's naturally bouncing. See, that could have well been where the jazz swing at. And if you syncopate that means rather than put it on the downbeat, you switch with the downbeats when you're counting. So when you're playing music, you're counting 1, 2, 3, 4 to 1, 2, 3. And in Western European music, we tend to stress them on the 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that's why it sounds really cheesy. But if you start to accent the 2 and the 4, or 1, you start to get get what is called syncopation. Now, if I do these drops on 2, so if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. If I'm doing that now, I'm getting this sound of 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. So as much as I can see that swing beat may well have its origins in the 3/2 polyrhythm of African music, or the 3/3/2 clave pattern of Latin American music, as I've got older and studied it more, I've started to wonder whether it's just a thing that comes from playing the drums with sticks from military drumming, and that this here, that pattern contains technically all the things that are required to play the drums. This is a really interesting thing. The jury's out on all this. People don't know. All we can do is discuss it, and have a conversation, and then logically go, well, I think that could be that, and then look in history to see if there's anything that backs up our ideas. Right. With the advent of rock music, we now have the hi-hat here. But we've got a snare drum and bass drum. So we can take that syncopation, and then we can put the downbeats on the bass drum, and the upbeats, the ones that make us feel like it's cool, the cool beats, we can play on 2 and 4. And we can keep time here. And this comes up with our basic rock beat, which is what most drummers learn now. They don't do all this jazz swing stuff or any of that. They learn this first. And it goes 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and a 1 and 2 and 3 and a 1 and 2. Right, so that's your basic rock beat. Now, what's interesting in this is that when you hear drummers play it, some players will say, "Oh, well, they got feel. That guy's got feel, and he hasn't got any feel." I want to show you something that's quite interesting. If we take this jazz swing, right, I want you to keep that in your head. So you can see, if you could retain that jazz swing feel, that syncopated jazz swing feel when you play your rock beats, it starts to have a certain feeling about it, right? Now, when the bebop jazz drummers transferred time to here, they're going. They wanted to be able to play off what the soloists are playing. Now, if you're playing this limb and this left foot are taken up keeping the time. But our snare drum and our bass drum are able now to play against the soloists, and this is what the bebop drummers innovate. And so there's a dialogue going on between the bass drum and the snare drum, in effect. Right, so you imagine you've got that dialogue going against this. Bebop drummers are playing. If we don't take the rock beat and bring that dialogue in, not all the time, because with the rock and roll records, they wanted to keep people dancing, so they didn't want to move too far away from that groove, from that 2 and 4 groove. But if we bring a little bit of it in, time here, all the time. And the funkiness is becoming from the dialogue of the bass drum and the snare drum. This is the big innovation of rhythm and blues drummers and soul drummers. And I'm condensing what happened and missing out all sorts of different things that the drummers did, you know, as I go through, and it'd be lovely to come back and pick up on those types of things. Right, so this is what's happening. Okay, now, once we get to that point, drummers can now start to think, how can we take this basic, how do we take that and start to advance it? And that's what's very interesting, and this is what I want to get into on this channel. You know, talking about prog and talking about jazz fusion, and me being a drummer, I would love to be able to get into the details of what drummers are doing. So what did Billy Cobham do? What did Tony Williams do? What did Steve Gadd do? What did Vinnie Colaiuta do? What did Terry Bozzio do? But also, what did John Bonham do? What did Ian Pace do? And what did Stuart Copeland do? What's the things that these drummers are doing? And you have to understand is what they're doing always fundamentally is taking the basic structure of drumming that we've run up through very basically here, and they are messing with it. Okay? They're messing with it. So if we take someone like Tony Williams, he pioneered a lot of stuff, but one of the things he did is, as you've seen, I'm keeping my time here on the 2 and the 4 in jazz. I'm keeping it with the hi-hat. So 1. And if we listen to someone like Elvin Jones is, however out he's going, whoops, drop your stick, gonna happen. Elvin Jones is always keeping time like that. Jazz drummers in the 60s, you can see they start to mess just with that. I'm just focusing on that. They did a whole bunch of other stuff. Jack DeJohnette, he started to put this in all over the place. Tony Williams starts playing it double time. That is a killer. It really is a killer. And I wish I sounded as relaxed as when he does that. So this is what drummers start to do. They say, how do we keep time, you know? Drummers like Billy Cobham, Mav Ishnox and all that jazz fusion thing, one of the things they start to do is they start to carve up the time in interesting fashions. And this is all based upon odd time signatures, you know. So they might be going, whoa. Stuff. Someone like Steve Gadd, he's really taking military drumming. He goes back to military drumming, but he plays in novel ways. So you get him not necessarily crossing his hands over on a lot of beats. You know, so that's the sort of stuff that's going on now. I think I've spoken enough. This is just an introduction to the way the drum kit works. This is a massive subject. I've really just scraped the surface of this, right? And also, I'm trying to keep this conversationally, so I haven't worked anything out. I'm playing this as we go, so this is just off the top of my head. So excuse a few, you know, wrong turns, and they're called mistakes. We call them mistakes in the business. There's a few of those, but you're going to get that on here. This is completely unedited. But yes, so I'm going to now play something just to finish up, I think, on here. I'm going to play a solo. Shall I do that? Shall I actually put my money where my mouth is? I'm going to play a solo, and this drum kit's a bit weird because I've taken out the toms and the stuff here so you could see really well. I've copied that bloke Was he from Spain? You know, the one with the beard that's insane on the drums. I can't remember pronounce his name, Esteban Prampa or something like that. I've copied him and I've got this so you can see straight through. I think it's a nice view. I'm sat in Low Street Studios. We're just recording this on the camera audio, but you've got a lovely room. The kit sounds great. Now I'm going to take the snares off and I'm going to create a drum solo. And you could see, hopefully, how I'm not necessarily doing the things that I've just described. I'm doing something else. Shall we try it then? Let's try it then. Shall we go? like and subscribe. If you want to become a patron, you can. The link's down below. If you want to drop some money in my PayPal tip jar to pay for the doctor, because I've knackered myself out now. Can't breathe properly because I've had COVID. I've still not got over it, you know. But anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. I'll see you on the next one.